Okay, so let's actually put into practice some row operations and perform our Gauss-Jordan elimination methods. So I will be using the notation that I've written out here, handwritten to the right, where my old rows, the rows that I'm using, are going to be lowercase r's, and the new rows that I'm going to be creating are capital R's. And our basic way through this is to create leading ones in the upper corner, and then create zeros above and below that, and then move on to the next column until we get all of our columns in unit form. So the first thing I want to do is take a system of equations and write it in its matrix, its augmented matrix form. And then the first thing we always want to do is we always want to, if possible, turn this upper left-hand entry into a 1 by using any of the three things we can do. So we could either, if there was a 1 somewhere else that we could just switch rows and make a 1 there, that'd be great. But we don't have another 1 in that column. So like switching the rows wouldn't help. I could put a 2 there instead. That doesn't get me anywhere helpful. So my other techniques that I can do is I can do some multiplying and adding, or multiply straight through by a value. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the row operation. I'm going to multiply. I'm going to get a little creative here. I'm going to take negative 1 times row 2, add that to row 1, and that's going to make my new row 1. Okay, and I'm going to show you how that works. So what that's saying is take every entry in row 2, so that's this row right here, take every entry there, multiply them by negative 1, and then add them to the entry above. So for this first column, what that's saying to do is to take negative 1 times 2 and add that to 3. So negative 2 plus 3 is 1. I created a 1 right here because, again, this is my new row 1, so that's where my new entries are going to be housed. Do that all the way across. So take negative 1 times this entry of 3 and add that to 5. Negative 3 plus 5 is 2. That's my new entry right here. And do it again. Negative 1 times 5 plus 9. Negative 5 plus 9 is 4. And I'm done at this stage with this row operation. I have used row 2 to do that, but the only row that gets replaced is whatever row you write right there. So row 1 was the only one that got replaced. Nothing happened to row 2. This is my pivot element. This is the value that I've turned into a leading 1. And now I'm going to use that leading 1 in order to make all the entries above and below it zeros. So I need to use this 1 to make this entry right here a 0 so that it's in that form where leading 1s, everything else in that column are zeros. Okay, it looks like what we want to do, use that 1, right? That's how I'm going to do it. I can turn a 1 into anything in the world I want to by multiplication. So if I took that 1 and multiplied it by a negative 2, if I do negative 2 times this row 1 entry, oops, I want to write this next to the row that I'm changing. So I'm going to write it down here. I'm going to take negative 1 times row 2, times row 1, add it to row 2, and that's going to be my new row 2. So row 2 is the only row that is changing right now. Again, I'm going to use row 1 to do it, but row 1 is going to stay this. So let's see, does that create the 0 that we want there? Let's try it. So if I take negative 2, I said it, but then I wrote it wrong. If I take negative 2 times 1, add that to 2, I definitely get a 0. Now I have to do that to everything else, so I'm going to take a negative 2 times 2, add that to 3, Negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. So I get a negative 1 here. Negative 2 times 4 plus 5, negative 8 plus 5 is negative 3. So I get negative 3 here. So what I've accomplished at this point is I've accomplished putting this row or this column as a unit column. That means that column is done. It has a leading 1 and it has zeros above or below that. So that column is finished. I now move down to my next, what would be my next leading 1. So I now need to turn this number right here into a new, I need to turn it into a leading 1. So this is my new pivot element. Is there an easy way that I can turn that number into a positive 1? Sure, I could just multiply that row by negative 1 and flip the signs. So I'm going to take negative 1 times row 2, and that's all I'm going to do. That's going to become my new row 2. So sometimes just multiplication will do it for you. I'm only changing row 2 right now, so 1, 2, and 4 stay. And let's see what we get. So if I take negative 1 times 0, I just get 0, so that stays. Once you create your zeros, nothing should ever turn them back. Nothing that you do should ever turn that back into something else. Okay, so here I take negative 1 times 1, so I get, sorry, negative 1 times negative 1, so I get positive 1, which is what I wanted. That was the point of this. And here I take negative 1 times 3, negative 3, so I get positive 3. Okay, so we're good there. So now we have a leading 1 here, we have a leading 1 here. Now I want to change the entries above or below this new leading 1. This is where I'm pivoting now. I want to turn this 2 into a 0. So how could we turn that 2 into a 0? And again, always use your leading 1 to do that. So I'm going to take, in this case, negative 2 times row 2, where that 1 is. I'm using this 1, add that to row 1, and that's going to become my new row 1. Again, I'm using row 2 to do this, but it is not changing itself. Okay, so let's see what happens here. In this case, if I take negative 2 times 0 and add 1, I get 0 plus 1, 1. Again, any operation, any row operation that you decide to perform should never undo something that you have purposefully created already. So that unit column that I had already created, if anything that I choose to do from here on out messes that up, then I've made a wrong choice. So that's kind of a double check that you can do as you're working. It should never mess those up. Those are what we're going for, and once we make one, we don't want to undo it. Okay, on this, then we would be taking negative 2 times 1 plus 2. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Okay, so check. That was what we wanted to happen. And then let's see what happens here. If we take negative 2 times 3 plus 4, we get negative 6 plus 4, negative 2. And now we're finished. We have both of our columns in unit column form. This is in that row reduced form because it checks off all of those 4 criteria that we talked about. And we can now read off our answers. So we dropped out the variables x and y at the very beginning, but technically they've been there the whole way. So what I can do is I can read this across now. It's saying that 1x and no y's is negative 2. So the x value is negative 2. No x's and no x's, but 1y is 3. So y is 3. The answer to this system is the point negative 2, 3.